Hey, this is Matt.
This is Bill.
And you're about to enter the DMZ.
DMZ is going to be, I think, a fun place today.
The DMZ is the place to be. And we are taping, for those keeping score at home. We're taping a little early. It is a Wednesday. So it's
a Wednesday morning.
Thursday. Yeah.
But hot on the news, from where we last left off last week, we were talking about the Mitt Romney hire of Richard Grenell to be his foreign policy spokesperson, and the Washington Post blogger Jennifer Rubin's swipe at you for covering the fact that some social conservatives were upset about the fact that Grenell was openly gay. And when we talked about this last week, this was it didn't even reach the level of Tempest in a Teapot because no one was really covering it, quite frankly. Yeah. It didn't get any kind of social media coverage.
This is a weird story, Bill. There's a lot of ambiguity here, and I wonder if things are going to change. Like, in other words, we're taping this Wednesday morning. I wonder if more things are going to come to light because there's so much weirdness about this story. And one of the things that makes it weird is that you're right. The story basically disappeared. Nobody was outraged, as far as I know. Nobody was talking about this guy. And then all of a sudden...
even within the conservative world, I know from my vantage point, I'm not reading anything in the New York Times or the Washington Post about this over the past 2 weeks. But within the conservative world, there was no buildup of ire. There was no... domino effect of statements made by social conservatives demanding Romney fire this guy?
I mean, not that I know of. And is it possible?
I would think you would know. You're in there.
You're talking to the CPAC conservative blogger of the year, Bill. But so yeah, I mean, you would think that I would know, but I'm not. I don't presume to know everything, every conversation that happens in the conservative movement. But clearly, it's not. It wasn't a big enough deal that I heard about it. I mean, here's the truth is, the only time I heard, well, let me back up. Jennifer Rubin, the aforementioned Jennifer Rubin, broke the story that this guy, Richard Grenell, was either fired or resigning. Here's how she spun it.
Can I stop you right there? Because that's weird in and of itself. The Romney campaign announced this to a statement to her. We assume that that the Romney campaign gave it to her. We assume that because she's their unofficial spokesman. But we don't know that, right? I mean, we don't know who leaked it. It could have been Grenell. Well, I don't know who leaked it, but it was not a blast press statement to all of the press. There was no press conference. It was reported by her on her blog, and she's not there as a traditional reporter. She's there as an opinion blogger. And is widely considered to be a pro-Romney blogger, and they fed this story to her, and I just don't see that much. There's all sorts of ways that candidates, I guess, go around traditional press, but I find this particularly odd that we have somebody at a media institution who's not really a reporter and is kind of our mouthpiece, and we're just going to give her this statement directly to nobody else.
It's interesting. There's a lot of weird stuff. Now, first of all, let's go back in time. When Grenell was first selected, there was an uproar from the left because he had deleted hundreds of tweets.
Literally hundreds. That's not hyperbole.
Literally hundreds of tweets that he made. He was like apparently. I don't know this guy. He had been a spokesman for. Help me out.
Bolton, John Bolton, right?
Yeah, Ambassador Bolton, I guess, at the UN. And Bolton...
And that guy's a squish.
Yeah, he's a real wimp. So the guy'd been around, and normally people who engage in this sort of, like, Twitter flame wars tend to not be, like, foreign policy spokespersons, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Ari Fleischer... doesn't mock Callista Gingrich's hair. But this guy, artist Richard Grenell, So there was an initial uproar, mainly from the left, that Romney had hired this guy who had said some very controversial and you would say probably inappropriate things on Twitter.
And so it had a bit of a sexist quality to them, the way he criticized female political figures. I mean, that's what the left sort of glommed onto.
Right. And then later, Ben Smith from Politico comes out with this story that another guy that, as far as I know, I'd never heard of, a guy named Brian Fisher, who until a week ago I thought was the head coach of the Tennessee Titans, apparently is a conservative activist in, I think, Mississippi or Alabama. He runs a group or works at a group called the American Family Association. I mean, I'm looking at my notes now because that's how irrelevant this guy is.
And the American Family Association was bigger in the 80s. They used to do boycotts against racy TV shows when it was headed by Donald Wildman. But I don't know who the changing of the guard and what they've done lately. But they used to be sort of a bigger name in the social conservative movement. But I haven't heard much about them in recent years.
And apparently, Romney had a falling out with this guy. So it's not like, apparently, remember when there was another pastor from Texas who said some anti-Mormon things at a Value Voter conference?
Right.
Like, apparently around that same time, Byron York at the D.C. Examiners reported that, Romney sort of threw this Brian Fisher guy under the bus, too. So it's not like they're tight. And this Brian Fisher guy, I don't want to accuse him of something he didn't do. I think he said some anti-Mormon stuff in the past, at least according to what I read from Byron York. So anyway, it's very weird. Why would this guy, Brian Fisher, who is so influential that he has 1,300 Twitter followers, which, and by the way,
I have more Twitter followers than that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. If you're Joe Blow and you have 1,300 Twitter followers, that's a lot. But if you're ostensibly a power broker who is commanding Mitt Romney to hire and fire people, you might have more than 1,300 Twitter followers. So, within conservative movement circles, I mean, it's clearly he's not tight with Romney. We also seem to have a real major leadership role amongst other social conservatives. He's not, he's not, Ralph Reed in the Christian Coalition in the '90s. Right. It's not like he's up the Pied Piper here. No, he's not Ralph Reed, and he's not Gary Bauer, and he's not Tony Perkins, and maybe some of those folks had some behind the scenes conversations with Romney that we don't know about, that helped push this along. Who knows? But I'm of the opinion that social conservatives are not that powerful to begin with. Here's what makes them powerful. What makes them powerful is that there are a lot of Americans around the country who agree with them. So, in that sense, if you become pro-abortion and the voters find out, they may punish you at the polls. This has very little to do with the fact that the leaders are powerful. Like the Club for Growth, which is a fiscal conservative group that does not get involved in social issues per se, I would argue is much more organized and powerful and effective than anybody on the social conservative side. There's really very little reason to fear the social conservative leaders, other than the fact that the masses, the voters, may punish you for something. But it's not because they were really led by, in other words, the days of the Christian Coalition being really effective are over. They've been gone for 50
they weren't able to get Santorum over the hump. If they had that much influence, Romney wouldn't be the nominee.
And remember, they had a meeting in Texas, and they voted to back Rick Santorum. How's that working out for you? I mean, right. I'm not gloating here. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying the notion. I am observing, and my observation in the past has had me called a homophobe. So maybe my observation now will have me called anti-social conservative. Maybe I'm just a hater. Maybe I'm simultaneously anti-gay and anti-social conservative. I mean, I guess it's possible.
I just think you're an equal opportunity hater. You just like to hate.
An angry young man, contrarian. But my point is, the notion that Brian Fisher, with his 1,300 Twitter followers, has the juice to get a spokesman for Ambassador Bolton, hired by the Mitt Romney campaign, pushed out. I'm a little skeptical. But guess what? That is how Jennifer Rubin framed it. So she broke the story, and as you know, Bill, the way that political media narratives work, the person who first breaks the story has a tremendous amount of power because they kind of set the context. And Rubin's headline at the Washington Post was, let me use the right word here. She said that Richard Grenell was, quote, hounded out, unquote, of the Romney campaign by anti-gay voices. Now, maybe that's true, or maybe it was the stupid tweets that he sent out that some describe as
even the tweet thing, that fervor seemed to have died down too.
Well, that's the other thing. None of this was controversial 2 days ago. I mean, I thought the story had gone away. Here's what I think happened. I think what happened is the Romney people, for whatever reason, weren't giving him a lot of responsibility, and he was unhappy, and I think he decided to quit, and I think he threw them under the bus. I'm guessing.
So you think Grenell fed Rubin, not Romney HQ?
That's my guess, because why would it benefit Romney to have a story come out? Now, here's where it also gets interesting. Maybe Romney did leak it, as I'm trying to think, was it Jake Tapper? Somebody, maybe it was, no, I think it was Chris Cillizza on Twitter, the fix at the Washington Post. I think it was Chris who hypothesized that if Romney was going to get rid of Grenell, or if Grenell's departure was imminent, you would want to drop it during President Obama's surprise visit to Afghanistan. So that leads to the argument that Romney did time this. He knew it was going to be potentially bad news, so he timed it to coincide. As soon as he found out about the surprise visit, they dropped this story. That's why it sort of is apropos of nothing. That's why the timing didn't make sense. So who knows? There's so much weirdness to this, Bill. I mean,
and to back up your point, I'm just looking back at her original post again. The statement that she obtained is from Grenell. She obtained a Grenell statement, not a Romney campaign statement.
Well, later I think she got like Matt Rhodes or somebody from the Romney campaign to weigh in.
Yes, the initial scoop appears to be, she says in a statement obtained by Right Turn, which is the name of her blog, Grenell says. So the initial scoop is from Grenell.
Now, I suppose it's possible that the campaign released a statement from Grenell or somebody, it's unclear. But if I'm Romney, do I want a headline that says Grenell was hounded out by anti-gay voices in the conservative movement? Like, number one, it's unclear to me that that's true. Number two, I don't know that makes Romney look particularly good, either to his base or to the world. And number three, it certainly doesn't make social conservatives look good. And as I said, I'm not entirely confident that it's true. I mean, does Brian Fisher, and again, I have to refer to my notes to remember who this guy is, does he really command that much power? I would challenge him, if you are that powerful, get me fired from the Daily Bill. That is my challenge. Maybe you can do it. Maybe you are that powerful. Maybe you have that much, and we have a lot of readers out there. We've got there are prominent conservatives who are investors. Perhaps you could call them, and maybe on Monday I will be gone, and we will find out that maybe he is the vast right-wing conspiracy. Maybe he is the one guy pulling all the strings. I don't think that's the case, but according to Rubin, maybe he is. So
this just leaves me with so many questions. I mean, so one, since it seems implausible that there was actual pressure being applied to the Romney campaign from either the social right or the left, is it, one, the Romney campaign is incompetent and is overly sensitive to possible friction, and therefore prematurely threw somebody under the bus? Is it two, Grenell had a misunderstanding how much responsibility he was going to get, and so he ended up making an irrational response to it, and having this fan the flames. Or three, this actually was something that the Romney people did have to do to, head off a burgeoning story because they're getting private back channel chatter that is going to blow up on them, and they thought if they gave it to their best friend Jennifer Rubin, they'd get a cleaner story out of it, and Rubin just.
What they discovered is that Rubin hates social conservatives more than she loves Mitt Romney.
Well, so the other question is I feel it's pretty clear that
John
Rubin.
McCormick's theory from the Weekly Standard on Twitter, and he may be right.
I mean, I certainly think that Rubin is transparently in Romney's pocket. I think she's done a number of things as of late that are blatantly hackish. And look, I'm not against people being partisans or being team players. I'm not a journalist.
Well, I think it's number one. It's boring. It's boring to why not just go read the RNC's talking points if you want someone who doesn't think, creatively or sort of call them like they see them.
Well, it's strange for the Washington Post to hire somebody like that, and it's also she's not being transparent in what she is doing if that's what she really believes. But I also want to raise the possibility that even though she is a Romney partisan, that she is a bad Romney partisan. And isn't a very good hack, and therefore is doing things. Maybe she thinks she's helping, but she actually isn't.
I mean, it could be people make decisions and for all sorts of illogical, irrational reasons, and you try to get in their head and sort of game it out, and it's weird. I mean, if she really wanted to help Mitt Romney, a more clever way would be to not be so transparently pro Mitt Romney. That way, when you actually come to his defense and say he's right, like, for example, as you know, Bill, and I don't want to segue yet because there's so much more to talk about here. But as you know, I think you remember, I was one of the people saying I think we should give President Obama a lot of credit for the gutsy decision to kill bin Laden. Because of that, I feel like I have more credibility to now say I think he's politicizing in a way that I personally think is unhelpful. But it's because I have the credibility, I think, to say that. At least, if I had denied Obama credit or sort of poo-pooed the idea that he did anything correctly, then I don't feel like I would be as well positioned to now state the other side of it.
I mean, at the minimum, it at least. I disagree with you on your latter point, but I think you are sincere in making it because you at least established your sincerity in your previous point. And
it's not like I made the initial point and 15 minutes later attacked Obama on it. It was like a year later when things changed.
I mean, that's why, forgive me if we're segueing. I think it's weaker for Romney because the Obama campaign is saying, look, we're not just making a cheap shot here and attacking someone's patriotism. Romney said this. Romney said something in 2007 that he wouldn't move heaven and earth to find one person, clearly in the context of talking about bin Laden. And he has to, take responsibility for what he said. And we're going to say we have a foreign policy difference, a strategic priority difference, and we're going to call attention to it. And the Romney people say, wait a minute. 3 days later, the Romney people say, 3 days later, Romney said he wanted to kill bin Laden. Well, yeah, that was 3 days later when you're trying to clean it up. So that's not the same as actually having a clear view that you were on the same page as Obama on this. So that since you had more distance between your comments, I think you are in the stronger position in what you're saying.
Well, thank you. I would say this. We could argue over the merits of that, but I think there's another point that that I would get at, which is to say I think that President Obama has deprived us as a nation of the opportunity to have a special bipartisan patriotic moment. I really do. So
are we segging? Are we formally segging?
I think we have segged.
Okay.
I mean, we could go back, but I think we've segued.
Right.
And it happened very organically. I think, without getting into the weeds on what you just said, my larger concern is that I think this ties into, I I think this is like a metaphor for one of my problems with Obama, which is that I do believe, and we've fought about this for years, I do believe he had the chance to be a sort of transcendent, post-partisan, transformational leader that he campaigned as, and at every turn he takes the partisan sort of hackneyed political solution. And I think he deprived us as Americans of one of the rare moments we might have had of coming together. And in the process, I think he deprived himself of sort of presiding
Bush, I mean, before you get into Obama saying, I mean, would you say Bush did something at minimum similar? That was not a unifying moment to Bush. He used it in lots of political ways over the course of his presidency?
Which one? Which time?
I mean, he used. I mean, there was the RNC took out Max Cleland in Georgia. There was the use of ground zero imagery in the Bush reelection campaign. There was the conflation of if you're against the Iraq War, it's because you don't want to stand up for America after 9/11. There's all sorts of things like that folks on the left were felt were divisive at the time.
It's an interesting thought. I have to give it some thought. I mean, first of all, I think that part of it is a process of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, so that, to me, those moments didn't seem tainted, but maybe if I were a liberal or a Democrat, they would have seemed tainted because the Republicans politicized them. I have to give it some thought objectively to see if that was the case, because it didn't hit me that way at the time. But I'm, sometimes where you stand depends on where you sit. Now, Bush did run as saying, "I'll be a uniter, not a divider," and he clearly failed at that. Now, there was 9/11 that happened, so that is a huge sort of asterisk for everything, in my opinion, that happened the rest of his term, including the economy and everything else. That's a huge change, and there's little. I mean, it's understandable that his worldview and his policies would change after the attack. But I would also say that Obama also ran as a change agent who was going to transcend politics. He was very critical of using events like this, politicizing events. He accused Hillary Clinton of scaremongering and fearmongering and of politicizing, foreign policy. So there is an element of hypocrisy, I think, attached to what he has done. But I also just think it's a missed opportunity. I mean, even if I were to concede your point, Bill, I would essentially be conceding that, yes, Barack Obama did the wrong thing just as George W. Bush did the wrong thing, and that, yes, Barack Obama has politicized an event and failed to bring Americans together just as George W. Bush politicized foreign policy and failed to bring things together. I think that Obama had an opportunity to really be a uniting figure and a leader, and instead he's become a Democratic politician. And I don't want to
get into who's right, who's wrong in the spirit of the DMZ. I want to look at this in terms of do we think it's going to work or not? I would say if it was perceived that Obama is taking a unifying moment and cheapening it for crass political gain, I would think that would not work. That would diminish the Obama brand, the Obama message of being a transcendent figure. And if that happened, he would, from a political standpoint, would throw away something that had been a point in his favor. It would seem, and I don't think the Obama campaign team and Obama himself are insensitive to those sorts of risks.
Right.
What I see, at least my interpretation of their thinking is, number one, we can't presume that anything sells itself. you have to make your case all the time in this very chaotic media environment where, I mean, people always have short memories. It's human nature, and the current media landscape doesn't help with that fact. So you got to repeat, and there's no risk in talking about it too soon. And the second notion is anything, well, not anything, but it is in their interest to do something that raises an eyebrow in some way to get people talking about it and to put your opponent on the defensive. So if you got Mitt Romney saying, hey, no fair, you should be politicizing this, you've now created a story where there was no story, and it's a story that talks about the fact that begins with Obama got Osama. So that in of itself is helpful for them. But you can take that logic too far, as I said, and if it's seen as crass polarization, I don't think it would all hang together. And where I think they end up not crossing the line, or at least they think they're not crossing the line, is they're not saying Romney hates America because he had a different view about bin Laden. They're not saying Romney is a secret Muslim because he had a different view about Obama. He's saying they're saying Romney articulated a different foreign policy priority that at the time that I talked about it in 2007, 2008, it was a live debate point, not just a partisan one, because Hillary was against me on that point at the time too.
And Joe Biden.
Right. And Obama,
Rudy, I think Rudy Giuliani and Mike Huckabee were sort of with Obama,
right?
Saying,
and so I mean, it's not saying that that's a partisan point. At least back then, it was: is it more important to get bin Laden, or is it more important to respect Pakistani sovereignty and not risk that allied relationship, which is a legitimate point of discussion?
Well, there's so much to this, though, Bill. I mean, first of all, I'm always hesitant to criticize people on what they say about foreign policy because, number one, candidates don't know everything. Number two, there's a matter of diplomacy. I mean, Barack Obama went to the White House Correspondents' Dinner and told jokes, and he knew that Navy SEALs were about to take out bin Laden. I mean, there is an element of deception involved. And it's entirely possible that a candidate saying he would invade an ally's territory could create an international crisis, or at the very least make things more difficult for the current commander-in-chief by virtue of that rhetoric. When in fact, he would have every intention of actually doing it if he really believed that he could get bin Laden. So the other point is, what good does it do to make this point? So we've conceded that Hillary Clinton, a woman that Obama trusts enough to make his Secretary of State, disagreed with him. We've made the point that Joe Biden, who is a heartbeat away from the presidency, disagreed with him. This is a unique instance. It's not going to repeat itself. Bin Laden isn't going to become reincarnated, and 3 years from now, the next president has to decide whether or not to go into Abbottabad and take him out. So it was a very unique situation. I don't know that it's telling about a president's toughness or foreign policy acumen. So what good does it do?
Well, I think the Obama campaign doesn't agree with you on that point.
Out that Romney, what good does it do?
Well, I think from the Obama campaign,
but it doesn't say anything about Romney's foreign policy, does it? Really?
I mean, Obama's trying to make the case that it does. I mean, you can disagree, of course, but I mean, they're trying to make, I think, a very big point, not just about re-election, quite frankly. I think they see an opportunity here to completely turn the tables of which party do you trust on national security. Coming off of 8 years of Bush being anchored to the Iraq War and that not being seen as a foreign policy success, which already started to turn those tables in polling going back to 2006 when Democrats took over Congress. Now they're trying to say, look, I made this gutsy decision as a candidate, and I got flack from the foreign policy establishment at the time. I followed through as president, and their concerns what might transpire have not come to bear. And my candidate is an example of this outdated thinking. And therefore, not just me, Barack Obama, you should trust with national security, but my party is better at national security, has better foreign policy priorities, better strategy, better competence. And so the question is, is that a plausible subtext? Will people buy that? Will it actually change things? At minimum, I would say, I heard Ari Fleischer say this week, Bush was excoriated when he had a campaign advertisement that used ground zero imagery, and Barack Obama is getting off scot-free because no one is expressing the same kind of ire at him doing it. And I think that is misleading because whatever complaints the left had at the time, they didn't work. Bush won. Bush used those ads and he got reelected. In fact, you could argue it was the reason he got reelected, that he was able to maintain a national security advantage over John Kerry.
Right. Well, so that kind of brings me full circle to my larger point, which is to say, I think Obama's rhetoric is optimistic, but his political strategy is cynical. And I think he believes that that being a transcendent uniter may make him a popular loser, a popular ex-president, and that by playing tough and I would say playing politics, he has a much better chance of being reelected. And
I mean,
he may be right, but that's not hope and change. That's politics as usual.
Well, I don't, I agree with you halfway. I think there's a difference between tough and cynical. I think they play tough. I think they play rough. They're not a namby-pamby campaign. This was an aggressive political decision to make, to use this in an advertisement. There's a lot of questioning of, how will Obama use this? How will he use this? Oh, he mentioned the State of the Union address. Well, that was pretty gutsy. I heard Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC complain, saying, hey, he used it too soon. What's he going to have left for the convention if he's going to talk about this, 11 months out? Well, you can see they don't care about talking about 11 months out. They're going to keep talking about it all the way through. And they think that if they are going to put Romney on the defensive, when Democrats complain, I think what Bush did was worse. It's my personal opinion. You can disagree and say it's identical. Even in a situation I think was worse, when the left and the Democratic Party complained and whined, and instead of making an argument why they had a better foreign policy and just said, hey, no fair, you shouldn't be allowed to talk about this, we're all in agreement that bin Laden's bad, so stop talking about it. The public said, your whining doesn't engender faith that you know what you're talking about. You're not giving me a reason to believe you have a better idea about how to do this. And I think Mark McKinnon, who was Bush's campaign aide, has a Daily Beast piece today saying a similar point, saying Romney is walking into the same trap that we set for the Democrats in 2004. They're complaining about this as opposed to talking about, the issues that are on their stronger turf. And so the Obama campaign, I think, is perfectly happy to have the Romney argument be, you're not playing fair, as opposed to I have a better foreign policy than you do. This totally strips apart Romney's no apology narrative. How do you work that in when you're complaining about this?
A couple points. One, there's what I do, and then there's what the Romney campaign does. Meaning, maybe it's not smart for them to talk about it, but I'm going to point this out.
Fair enough.
So, second point. George W. Bush ran an incredibly, Karl Rove ran an incredibly cynical and divisive campaign in 2004. And it worked, but there were major repercussions. And the Republican Party is still paying the price for some of that today. So there could be unintended consequences and a backlash if Obama tries to replicate what Bush did in 2004. And it seems like he very well may be doing that.
So what do you think is the risk for Obama if he wins with the strategy that he's on?
Well, the great question, let me just make one more point, and then I want to address that. My last point, which goes back a couple points ago, is I sort of do hold Obama to a higher standard because he presented himself as not a regular politician. But let me throw this out to the audience and to the people who believed in him. if Barack Obama can't rise above politics and be a different kind of politician, can anybody? If this guy who has so much talent and charisma and promised, his hope and change message, if he still has to play petty partisan politics to get reelected, how can anybody? I think it's incredibly disappointing and frustrating, and maybe this is how you have to play the game.
Well, I think what you're raising there is something that a faction of the left is angry and frustrated with Obama about. Maybe not about this particular issue with the Bin Laden ad, but about the way Obama goes about legislating. To what degree does he try to change the system or work within the system? And the fact, and when he's making decisions that are more on the compromise path and working within the system, and dealing with special interest groups, corporate interest groups, and whatnot, trying to cut deals with Republicans, keeping on some of the Clinton team that was involved with financial deregulation, for example, all those sorts of things.
I think you're right. I think the rhetoric, part of what bothers me about Obama is I think it's misleading. I think the rhetoric is misleading.
I think there's some of the left that agree with you. I would argue.
And the hope, but it's a much more, strategically, they are much more cynical and political than the rhetoric would ever imply.
I mean, that is a legit criticism to make, and again, I think people on both sides make it. I also think there's another way to look at it, which is they work very hard to straddle the line in doing some things that are truly reformist, and being obliged to do some things working within the status quo, but still trying to push the ball forward. Because if you are completely on one side of the line, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to have some. There's always a balance between the idealistic and the pragmatic. And I think going back to Obama's days as a community organizer or state legislature or U.S. senator, he's always tried to walk that line and not be consumed by the status quo and not be so high and mighty that he crashes to the ground. What's going to help him, I think, is the fact that it'd be one thing if he was doing this the last 4 years and nothing to show for it. But he has things to show for it. You can argue that they're not enough. Obviously, if you're running against him, you're going to say they're not enough. But he's going to say, what I have done is evidence that my approach works. I get things done. I would like to do more. Re-elect me and give me a Congress that will let me. But he gets friction on the left, too, for this notion that he has not been enough of a change agent. And when you set a high bar, you do open yourself up for that sort of criticism.
That is why I keep the bar very low. I will not show up much. I will be drunk frequently when I do show up. I will not take out the trash. Will not put the toilet seat down. None of that. Start low. Under-promise, overachieve. That's politics 101.
Well, I just want to make one last point, if I can. I do think the way Obama's handling things so far, not just with Bin Laden, I think the Obama campaign has been on 100% offense since Romney wrapped up the nomination, and Romney's been 100% defense.
Yes, and that may be a positive. I see it as Obama's starting it, picking every fight.
Yeah, he is.
Now, I would say that Romney, and I've said this for a long time, Romney's very good at the counter punch and throwing elbows back. But Obama is inciting divisiveness and dissension. Maybe you call that.
He's running against somebody. He's got to beat the guy. He's not running for a joint victory. He's running to beat Mitt Romney. You have some ability to try to take out his opponent.
If Newt Gingrich had only won, this campaign would be so different. They would be going around the country right now holding a series of Lincoln-Douglas debates, and this campaign would be completely different and so much more
Another campaign would be, because Obama would never agree to that, Gingrich would be following Obama around.
Or that. I mean,
giving a speech after Obama gives a speech.
That's a possibility, too. But I think more likely a civil series of a dozen, maybe 24 Lincoln Douglas debates, where each candidate would speak for an hour with no moderator. And so anyway.
But I mean, in the campaign, in the primary campaign, I can't think of a situation where Romney set the tone, injected the story, framed the narrative. He basically let all his opponents do that, shoot to the top, and then flame out on their own while he was kind of just on a steady, even keel.
It was a rope-a-dope campaign.
Right, and that's not going to, I mean, if you thought Obama was going to let you do that, you should very quickly learn you're not going to wear that. Obama is going to aggressively frame this race week by week. Buffett rules, student loans, bin Laden. I mean, there's just no let up here. I mean, maybe they'll take a break in the summer or something, but they felt, hey, the campaign starts now. People's opinions are going to start to form. Let's start forming them immediately. And the Romney campaign seems to be caught flat-footed by that, or just not have the capacity, not have the skill set to know how do you take a candidate like Romney and create stories around him that set a narrative.
Well, I mean, not entirely true. We spent a week talking about Obama eating dogs. We spent a week talking about Hillary Rosen's comments and whether or not her war against stay-at-home moms, which I thought was bogus, but the point is we spent a week talking about it. And then, on the other hand, there is the power of the bully pulpit. I mean, yesterday, Mitt Romney, most people don't know this, but, went to New York, hung out with Rudy Giuliani. I think they took pizza to some firefighters. I mean, it could have been a nice sort of photo op, but an Occupy Wall Street protester started yelling, Romney's racist. That sort of dampened things. Oh, and by the way, President Obama made a surprise visit to Afghanistan, which perhaps got a little bit of news coverage. So some of this is an inherent difficulty of being a challenger facing an incumbent. But I don't think I agree with you that I think Obama has been very aggressive and has been on offense. I don't think it's been that bad. I think the Republicans are right now sort of pleasantly surprised at how tough Romney has been and how aggressive he's been and how good things have gone so far. Now, maybe we look back a month from now and that's not the case. But as of now, I don't think Republicans are in panic mode. And I think they're actually quite heartened by the campaign of Romney's run so far. Granted, the last couple of days have been kind of bad days, including the story we talked about earlier. Let me look at his name. Richard Grenell and Brian Fisher, who is not the head coach of the Tennessee Titans.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left. There are a couple things that you had on your mind. I don't know which one you want to get to first.
Yeah, so we got I don't know if these are big ideas, but they're medium ideas. Let's talk about the Paul Ryan one. We've had a somewhat contentious, although in the spirit of the DMZ, not overly contentious conversation. So this one should be good. Paul Ryan last week gave a speech at Georgetown University talking about his Catholic faith. There's some uproar, mainly from lefty blogs, about Ryan's admiration for Ayn Rand. And some people believe, I think Talking Points memo, or I think it was Think Progress, and Andrew Sullivan weighed in on this, about whether or not he lied. Because at one point Ryan was sort of saying how influential Rand was, and then most recently he gave an interview with the National Review's Bob Costa, a guest host on the Weekend Blog recently, where he basically said, no, it's Thomas Aquinas and Jack Kemp are my, philosophical heroes, not Rand, who was an atheist. And I explained that both are likely true. That it is sort of widely understood within mainstream traditional conservatism that Ayn Rand is a gateway drug. A lot of young, romantic, idealistic people who are liberals or just, whatever, secular, whatever, become introduced to the ideas of conservatism through Rand, and then over time, as they mature, and typically become more mature adults and conservatives move away from Rand's philosophy, her objectivist philosophy. And I think that's probably the case with Paul Ryan, that, that Rand's kind of romantic, idealistic thing appealed to him, but he started to see her sort of, atheistic, anti-altruistic worldview, and he is a Catholic, and it didn't comport with his other values and worldview, and sort of things that as we get older and more mature and get married and have kids and see how the world actually works. But you can still appreciate her and her pro-capitalist, anti-communist ideas without becoming an Ayn Rand devotee. And so I think that's sort of...
I don't quite understand if you're a conservative and you don't fully embrace Ayn Rand's objectivism, what aspects about it are you rejecting? Is it just the godless part, or are there other parts about the policies that don't jibe with modern conservatism?
Well, I'm not a Rand expert, but I mean, like, for example, her personal life was quite interesting. Certainly not what you would consider to be a good person. Not only, Rand. My understanding is that she saw altruism, charity as a weakness, as a negative thing, and that's really
inside or outside government.
Both.
Right. So she was making because the conservative point today seems to be charity's fine, just not through the government.
Right, and I think that she would basically have like a sort of social Darwinism thing. And obviously the left is trying to use Paul Ryan's connection with Rand and his admiration for some of her policy or some of her ideas as a way to say that his budget is similarly ruthless and non-altruistic and not compassionate for the poor. But that's clearly a stretch. And what I tried to do, look, I think some on the left are doing this on purpose. I mean, they don't really believe that Ryan is a Rand devotee. They're sort of trying to score political points. But I also guess that there are some people out there who sincerely don't know that this is sort of widely understood among conservatives, that Rand made some good points, that she did a lot of good in the sense of introducing new people to ideas of free markets and capitalism, and pointing out how communism and collectivism stifles the imagination of man, and sort of forced reallocating funds, central planning. All of those things are bad for the human spirit and bad for society. And so she had a very good message, and she's done a lot of good in the world in that regard, but that her general worldview, the sort of atheistic, anti-charity worldview, is by and large rejected. I mean, remember, Rand had a major falling out with William F. Buckley, and wouldn't even come to parties if she would call hosts, and if Buckley was going to be there, she wouldn't show up. She had this huge feud with Buckley. So the notion. So anyway, my point was to sort of tell people who are sincerely interested in this, not trying to score points, but sincerely interested, to put it in context, and hopefully we've done that. Are you there, Bill?
Oh, I missed the last thing you said.
Were you sleeping?
I was worried you got cut off. I missed your last sentence.
I put you to sleep. No, every once in a while, after giving a 10-minute soliloquy, every once in a while, I stop talking.
What was the very last thing you said?
So essentially, I was saying, I don't know if this is a big idea, but it's a point that I was just trying to make to provide context for people who may be sincerely interested in this, that it's not inconsistent to say that Paul Ryan admired Ayn Rand, and that he thinks that there's some good that she did, and that he simultaneously rejects her worldview. Like, that may seem like a lie or an inconsistency. It actually makes him within the mainstream of conservatism. That is like, now, here's what I would say. There are video or audio of Ryan sort of talking up Rand. I think it may be that he gets that she's a gateway drug for conservatism, and that he wants young people to read her, knowing that that they will someday put aside childish things, and that's going to get. There may be hate mail from some objectivists, because
we all know you're a hater, Matt.
Well, yes, I hate. Apparently, I hate objectivists. Apparently, the gays. And the social conservatives, which is quite an accomplishment.
Well, I just want to say 2 points in response to you. I mean, number one, I think your basic point that you can like Rand without embracing all of Rand is something that I think the left should be able to appreciate, because I think there's a number of folks on the left that would say, Karl Marx got these few things right. He made some very perceptive observations about class divisions and industrialization and so forth. That does not mean that the entire communist program makes sense. And a lot of times the left has complained, hey, just because I read Karl Marx doesn't mean I'm a Marxist. Don't malign me as a red because I'm reading somebody and trying to take something from it. So I think it makes sense that there be analogous theorists on the right that are used in the same way. Whether Ryan actually has that separation, I don't know, but I take your point that it's certainly not an implausible thing. But secondly, you argued that the left knows this about Ryan, but are trying to score political points. I would argue, I think it's the opposite. I think the left doesn't know that about Ryan. I think the left very, very much believes that he is diehard Randian and is trying to cover for it now, but it doesn't score any political points. Nobody cares. No one knows who Rand is outside of hardcore Politico types. So it's an odd thing to chase.
You may be right there. Maybe it's inside baseball. I mean, I would say, and my light just went on. I would say, one, his voting record is not even that. Never mind Rand. I don't know that Hayek would be terribly. I mean, he voted for like bailouts. I'm going to turn my light back on, and all sorts of stuff. So, if you look at his voting record, it's not radical at all. Look at his Club for Growth score. I would say he's in the middle of the pack. He's not close to being one of the most conservative, fiscally conservative congressmen.
He does have his budget, which is sort of like his ideal view of what to do.
Yeah,
you could say that trumps whatever votes he was forced to take, where he had to take half a loaf.
Right. The other thing is the Catholicism. Within there tends to be this impression that conservatives are Jerry Falwell. That all conservatives are like Southern Baptists. And there's a huge Catholic faction, which William F. Buckley, of course, was part of. In fact, many of the most prominent conservative journalists and intellectuals, arguably a disproportionate number, are Catholic. And many of them take it incredibly seriously, and I think Paul Ryan is among them. And the notion that he would adhere to Rand's philosophy is dramatically at odds with what he would have, the theology that he would have learned, that he practices as a Catholic. He worked for Jack Kemp, who I think called himself a bleeding heart conservative, and who ran HUD, and who advocated these enterprise zones. He was very much sort of a compassionate conservative I don't want to say before it was cool. I'll say when it was cool. That's his hero. That's it. That's who he worked for, and Bill Bennett. And so it's like saying that a kid who went, I don't know. It would be like saying that, think of a good music example here. I'm sure Kenny Chesney went to an AC/DC concert when he was 15. But he's still a
which you can see in his shows now. Well, you can see the influence.
Yeah. They were all influenced by things, but Kenny Chesney is a country singer. He may have gone to an AC/DC concert, and then maybe there's some elements of showmanship or rock and roll in his show, but he's a country musician, and I think that's sort of the thing with Paul Ryan.
Well, I don't think Paul, to the extent that Ryan is trying to boost his profile so he can be considered as a Romney VP choice or be positioned for 2016 or whatever it is that he wants to do. I don't know, but obviously he's trying to do something. He's certainly doing some high-profile things. I don't think his problem is separating himself from Rand. I don't think most people can. There are folks that are always looking for a unified worldview to show the dastardly behavior of others, and sometimes that's sort of a misplaced priority. But Ryan's bigger problem is defending his budget. He has to show he can communicate that what is in his budget is actually compassionate and not cruel. Because I think as it stands today, the rap on it is that it's cruel. And I don't think he's figured out how to solve that problem yet.
I think Ryan is as effective. How do I put this? Marco Rubio is better at telling a story of how free markets can lift people up, be a trampoline, not a help me out here, Bill.
Whatever is the
not a safety net
exercise equivalent of a handout.
Yeah, a trampoline, not a safety net. Marco Rubio, I think, is better at casting this kind of vision and an inspiring way of how free markets and capitalism.
Not a hammock. You going for hammock?
A hammock, yeah, not a hammock. Yeah. Anyway, we'll work on our delivery later. But I think, by and large, Paul Ryan's a very effective communicator. He's more of a policy wonk. And I think that Ryan is pretty darn good at expressing eloquently his position. The problem is that, no matter how good of a communicator you are, when you propose serious entitlement reform, it's very easy to demagogue that and to engage in meta-scare. So whether or not you agree with it or not, I just think from a communication standpoint, it's much easier to attack any sort of entitlement reform. So I don't think that Ryan has a communications problem in the sense that I think he's a pretty good communicator. I think it's just very tough to sell entitlement reform, irrespective of the merits.
Well, we leave it on that note, sir.
I think it was a good show today, Bill.
I do. I think the DMZ held.
That's right.
Tranquility reigns, despite my perhaps my higher decibel level might indicate otherwise, but I think it's still held.
Now, here's the thing. It's 10 o'clock. We haven't checked email or Twitter or TV in an hour. It's entirely possible that this, hang on a second, Richard Grenell, Brian Fisher thing, it's entirely possible that this thing is somewhere else. We may have to retape this. Can you come back at 3?
I see that Ruben has the lesson of the Grenell episode up.
Oh, geez. Interesting. I can't wait to read that. I think the lesson is that the radical anti-gay voices, and you know who you are evil and always win. And for this reason, Brian Fisher may come for me next. I may not be here next week. Not only is he so powerful to get me fired from the Daily Caller, he may get me taken off the DMZ. If you
might remember this, but the American Family Association went after Fox's Married with Children and see how that turned out. So I would not be afraid.
Well, if you tune in next week and it's Kirsten Solstice and Bill Scher, then you will know that they claimed another scalp. And if I'm here, then you'll know that they're slowly plotting to not make it look obvious what happened.
I wait with bated breath whether you will be here next week.
The countdown continues. It should be a big clock, and anyway, who shot JR? Or Mr. Burns?
How many 80s references can we cram into one show?
Many. All right, Bill. Good show.
I'll talk to you soon.
We'll see you next week on the DMZ.
Take care.
Thanks.